So I'm joined today by Alex Dickin from Ipswich Cladiators. Thank you for coming on to the Building Safety Faces interview, video, podcast, call it what you like series. We're still trying to work out exactly how this thing's going to land, but thank you for joining us.
No worries.
Could you run through just a little bit about yourself and Ipswich Cladiators and tell everyone that maybe doesn't know what's going on in Ipswich and Suffolk?
Okay, so I'm a leaseholder and resident of a affected apartment in Ipswich. And since finding out in November 2020 about the situation here at my building, it then became apparent that there was no action group, no campaigning for this serious and urgent crisis that was happening across the country. So contacted a few other buildings local to us, and we launched Ipswich Cladiators a couple of weeks before Christmas. And in our first week, we had a successful meeting with Ipswich MP Tom Hunt, who is supporting the McPartland and Smith amendment. So that would be really useful if that can be put through in Parliament and voted for.
Excellent. And then how many buildings do you now have sort of in the Ipswich Cladiators group, and how many would there be, do you think, if you had all of the buildings in the area? You know, what's the numbers?
Okay, so at the moment we represent 5 buildings in Ipswich, but we've now been made aware of 17 buildings in the county of Suffolk who have applied for the Building Safety Fund. And unfortunately, that doesn't include any buildings that aren't eligible. They could have compartmentation issues, lack of fire breaks, or under 18 metres. And even there may be buildings that are yet to apply.
Yeah, so it's a pretty big number. And I think probably Suffolk is probably not one of the counties that people would immediately associate with tall buildings and cladding and apartment blocks. But obviously even within a county like Suffolk, that's quite a significant number of people that are impacted by the building safety crisis.
Exactly. When the media or politicians talk about the cladding crisis, they tend to focus on the huge numbers in London. I believe there's 700 that are quoted to have waking watches. Yeah. So the figure of 17 buildings in Suffolk applying for the Building Safety Fund is small, as you say. But given how Suffolk is a very rural area, it is a shocking number.
And most of those you think are concentrated in Ipswich, are they? Do you think, in terms of where the distribution of the main number of buildings?
I would say the majority is in Ipswich, but there must be further buildings in other smaller towns in Suffolk, because I can walk around Ipswich and I can look at the buildings who you would say are above 18 metres, and there's not 17. So there must be more out there who are yet to go public, yet to even know about their issues. Because even for myself, I found out in November.
Right.
And here I am in January fighting and campaigning. So there must be so many people out there unaware that their building is affected.
So it really is frustrating. I mean, I think, you know, we've been overt as Building Safety Register since June 2019. But working under a different guise, or our parent company guys, you know, prior to that point. So, you know, we're a couple of years in, and it's just amazing the people that we met at the start that most are still there, but some of them have just disappeared from the fight completely. I think they're out of fight. And then the amount of new people that are coming in and sort of saying, I'm new to this, I've been at it for 2 weeks, you know, pleased to meet you, can you tell me all about it? And you just think that it shows us how much further we've got to go with communication to get people to become, you know, even have the awareness that there's a problem. Exactly. I'd love to know why it takes so, I mean, maybe talk us through how you think it took so long, if you like, for you to become aware that you were swept up in this whole problem. I mean, what was the catalyst for you to realise that this was you?
Exactly. Well, on the 6th of November, a waking watch was implemented downstairs in the lobby, and it did take me a couple of weeks to really process what that meant. You almost have a denial that it's happening, that those fire marshals are downstairs patrolling your building. But then after those 2 weeks, it was like, okay, it is happening. Let's see what we can do about it.
So to get this right, so I'll get the chronology right. So you're living in your apartment.
Yeah.
Everything is fine. And then effectively the first awakening that there's a problem for you is the fact that people turn up in the lobby wearing yellow jackets.
Correct.
So no preamble to that. There was no inkling that there was a problem or communication from the management or.
The big issue was that in 2018 there was a fire assessment report confirming that this building had minimal fire risk.
Right.
So as a resident living in an apartment building, you look at the Grenfell Tower tragedy and then you receive a report that says minimal fire risk 1 year later, and you think, okay, it's not affecting me.
Yeah.
So any news about the cladding scandal, you can kind of brush aside and say, okay, it's not affecting me, I can move on. But then 2 years later, suddenly they do another fire assessment report with a different contractor and they find 3 different defects. And then a waiting watch is implemented.
Yeah, and those defects are deemed to be so serious that you need human fire alarms walking around the building to keep you safe in your homes. I mean, it's just, it takes quite a lot for me to be speechless, but this is just unbelievable, really. I mean, I think if you looked at this by any kind of objective measure, if you look at this and sort of say, how on earth can that happen? How many failings were there along the way for you guys to get from that point that in 2018 a competent, we assume professional, said your building was fine, to 2 years later with nothing changing, all of a sudden you're at such a great risk, you need a waking watch 24/7. I mean, how does that happen? What are your thoughts on it? You know,
that was part of my denial in the first couple of weeks since those fire marshals appeared. It was the case of, okay, which report is now correct? Is it the 2018 one? And then the 2020, is that lying? Or is it the other way around? So it was the complete shock and thought of, okay, only one report can be correct. Which one is it? And it now seems that the 2021 is the correct one.
Yeah, okay, so you're at a point, so you now have a waking watch. And where are you in the process in terms of understanding the bill of work for remediation and applications to the Building Safety Fund? And did you meet the deadline for this? It sounds as though you might have been sort of beyond the initial application deadline.
I believe the freeholder just made the deadline for the Building Safety Fund, despite it being extended just before Christmas. So in terms of the Building Safety Fund, the application is in and I believe it's live, if you like. And similar for the Waking Watch Relief Fund, there's the intention that the freeholder will apply for that in order to receive funding for a new fire alarm system. Yeah. And on that subject, we've received our Section 20 notice for the fire alarm installation. And that's currently in its first phase.
And so we'll talk about the wider sort of Ipswich Cladiators kind of group in a moment. But I mean, for you and your neighbours, what impact is all of this having? I mean, talk me through what this actually feels like as when this is fresh and the conversations that are ongoing with neighbours.
Yeah, so actually, it's the first time that we've probably met as neighbours. We've got a WhatsApp group set up. We've got fortnightly meetings on Zoom. So in a way, it's been a good opportunity to meet neighbours, but in a terrible situation.
Yeah.
And I'd say that there's two sides for neighbours. There's either us that live here while owning and leasing our apartments. So there's the stress of living here in an unsafe building. And then on the other side, there's those who own and lease, but rent out their apartments. And for them, it's their their income, their tenants that may look at the news stories of our building, you know, headlines about how unsafe it is and how we've got fire marshals patrolling the building. Are those tenants going to stay there? Are they going to leave at the earliest opportunity, and then no one's going to want to rent here ever again?
Yeah,
there's that fear as well.
And has anybody in your block recently sort of tried to move or remortgage? Has that become an issue yet, or is that still something that's sort of to come in the future?
Yeah, that was my situation this summer. So following Rishi Sunak's announcement of the stamp duty holiday, me and my partner decided to put the apartment on the market and look for a house. And following the implementation of the Waking Watch, we just had to take it off the market. We knew that the game was up. And actually, it's frustrating to think that the estate agents did not make us aware at all of the EWS1 form and any complications that were going to happen if we got to that stage where we were trying to sell.
Yeah, there's multiple failings, I think, along, I mean, in so many areas, but yes, I mean, I think certainly the estate agency side of things, you know, you would have thought that if you're in the market of selling apartments, this is kind of a no-go really, for unless you've got that magical golden ticket piece of paper called an EWS1 with an A1 or a B1 grade. Yeah. Don't even bother. I mean, that's a whole separate conversation around the problems with EWS1 and how that came about. So you're stuck, and what is the roughly? I mean, what's the sort of, when you look at Waking Watch? I mean, probably you haven't got the remediation cost yet, and hopefully the Building Safety Fund will contribute some or all of what you need. Yeah. But what are the sort of what's been the bump in sort of service charges in terms of increases for covering Waking Watch and potentially sort of increased insurance costs and things? I mean, what's the sort of the percentage increase, do you think, in terms of the running costs to over and above the mortgage?
Okay, it's probably tripled my monthly service charge. And at this moment, I don't know about the insurance costs, because at this stage we would have normally received our service charge bill for the first 6 months of the year.
Yeah.
Still hasn't been released.
Right.
So that tells me that they're reviewing their costings and budgeting for remediation as we speak.
How do you feel as a leaseholder within this building? You're obviously talking to neighbours in other blocks, but around communication from the management company and how well you've been informed, or do you feel as though you've been looked after, or do you feel like you've been abandoned, or are you neutral? How do you feel?
So I would say that it's 50-50. Following our initial media presence when we went out to the local media regarding our Waking Watch, they really wanted to have a strong communication with us following that in order to stop that bad headlines, if you like. So we actually had quite a productive meeting with them. And since then, each week they send out Q&As. So we send in questions and they answer each week. Now, on most occasions, I'd say the answers are disappointing.
Okay.
Lacking information, lacking detail. Most of them have a to be confirmed or we'll let you know sort of answer. So all of the questions that you're asking me today, I still don't know the answer. And there's a lot of unknowns despite it going on for a couple of months now.
So it's sort of dragging information out bit by bit rather than sort of an open discussion around. And do you get the impression that's because they don't know the answer, or the answer to the question would be damaging and therefore it's not in their interest to be transparent with you? I'm trying to sort of understand why you just wouldn't, as a competent professional company answer questions in an open way?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we're aware that our management company is also the management company at other affected buildings. So it's not as if we are a one-off and it's their first experience of dealing with this crisis. They have many buildings on their books dealing with similar processes. So you would hope by now that they understand the crisis and are able to provide detailed and full answers, but not as yet.
Okay, all right, brilliant. So that's sort of quite a bit about your building. I mean, what the broader sort of Ipswich Cladiators group and communication, how do you structure? Do you have a sort of a leader in each building, and you get together on a call and discuss strategy, or how to talk me through the dynamics of how you organise in an area like Ipswich for this?
Yeah, exactly. So I would say, like you just said, there is a representative of each building who passes on the thoughts and the worries of every leaseholder in their own building, and then we join together in meetings and communications in order to get that message across. And now we're hoping to go back to the local media in this area to say, look, before, some buildings have gone public, some have kept quiet. We're not necessarily going to go out there and name and shame every building. We're just saying that here's the number of buildings affected. These are the issues. It's a really big problem.
Yeah, I think my personal view is we're on a tipping point now, in the sense that I think for every building you need to look at what are the upsides and downsides to being public about having a problem. And I think the longer this goes on and the more people realise that they can't move, they're getting the zero valuations back, they can't get EWS1, freeholder isn't going to pay, etc., then I think there's more and more positives to being overt and on the record, because then we understand the scale of the problem. When I say we, the broader public and the media understand the problem, that sort of says, I think if you said to the average sort of London-based journalist, how many tall buildings are there that might have building safety problems in Ipswich? I think some will probably say, well, where's Ipswich? And then they'd say, well, I don't know, one or two. I think they'd be quite shocked at the number in an area that you wouldn't necessarily associate with this type of building. I think, which is different if it was Canary Wharf or Newham or Southwark or areas of London, Leeds, Manchester, you wouldn't necessarily associate. So if you've got that many and that much of a concentration somewhere like Ipswich, this is a national problem and it's huge. But if we're under-reporting and thinking there's 5 when we should be talking about 17 or 25, that's a material difference. Exactly. So I would always sort of say to anybody that's in a block, and I'm sure there are lots of people out there, and we're talking about Twitter specifically here in terms of our, this series of interviews, is that I'm sure there are lots of people on Twitter talking about this subject whose building is not publicly known.
Correct.
And therefore, it's very difficult for people like us, when the media ask us to say, oh, how many buildings do you think there are in East Anglia with problems? It's very difficult, because all we can do is go and count what's publicly available and what's made known to us, as opposed to digging into the data of the Building Safety Fund, for example, and saying, okay, in the regional or county breakdown that they publish, where are those buildings? What towns or cities are they in, so we can understand some kind of distribution.
And that's the same problem that we've got as Ipswich Cladiators. We know the buildings that we've talked to, but we can see that government data of 17 in the area of Suffolk, and then we're wondering, okay, where are they? Who are they? So now our task is to try and reach out, not necessarily name and shame, but to reach out and support them and say, we're campaigning, would you like to join?
Yeah, and there is a big assumption there that the government sort of high-level stats that have been released are actually accurate. we would hope they are.
Yeah.
But again, the way I always like to look at these things, when somebody gives a number, I like to sort of say, okay, well, let's just test the number. Let's run a sanity check against it. And how did you get there? Or is it just a sort of effectively a made up number? And I think at the moment, what I can see with this whole sort of building safety crisis is there are so many estimates and guesstimates out there of varying degrees of reliability, that underneath it all, the reason we don't have the proper number is nobody's counted. And when I say nobody's counted, I'm looking at the government there to say they're the lead authority on this. Tell me exactly how many buildings there are of each type. Tell me what problems they've got. What's their risk rating?
Yeah.
We don't have that data, so you end up with these sort of wild changes of numbers or variability of numbers, of which you never really know what's accurate.
True.
So I'm hoping the BSF reporting is the buildings have been allocated to the correct counties or boroughs.
Yeah.
That has led to that reporting, but I couldn't be 100% sure because I can't see the list of 17 addresses and go and check them on Google Earth and say, actually, at that address is a 12-story building that from the images looks as though it's got timber decking or whatever the problem is, or ACM cladding or HPL cladding, or whatever the system would be, and therefore we can say yes, those 17 tally. And I think what's interesting is you're saying, knowing the area really well and living in the area, that you're struggling to reconcile the numbers.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you can look at a building and think, okay, is that above 18 metres? And if it is, then you look at the building, like you say, does it have timber decking? Does it appear to have cladding? Or then you wonder, actually, is it an external wall issue? Is it that their balconies have wooden floors? Or are they not affected at all?
Yeah.
And it's not a really nice thought to walk around your town and to suddenly have that thought in your head of looking at buildings and wondering what their issues are, rather than just walking around your town.
Mm. Presumably, prior to all of this happening, understanding external wall systems and cladding systems and construction and fire safety wasn't your day job. So there's been a crash course, I guess, in learning about fire safety.
Exactly, yeah. I've suddenly found myself to be an expert on those subjects, and I never thought I would have.
And is there anybody as you've come into this, is there anybody that has kind of been really helpful in terms of their content that you come across on Twitter or whatever, that you think, oh, I've read through and that person's explained? Or is there anybody that you want to sort of single out to say they were really helpful or useful, especially if they're on Twitter as well, because then we can reference them? And so yeah, where have you gone for your information?
Okay, so I'm going to mention a couple of people. First, there's Ritu, who is one of the founders of UCAG.
Yeah.
And she was really helpful and encouraging to launch Ipswich Cladiators. And also Corinne of Endar Cladding Scandal, who we had simple half-an-hour phone call, really useful information, and quite reassuring, actually, that your situation, you're not alone. There's thousands, millions more like you. So, and the information was so helpful.
That's really good, and we'll link to their Twitter handle so everybody can find them. And contrastingly, so that they are amazing campaigners that are not even charities, I don't think, just people helping people.
Exactly.
From a government perspective, has there been any help forthcoming from organisations like Lease, for example? Have you heard of Lease?
I've heard of Lease, but I've not directly been in contact with them as yet.
Okay. But you haven't, even without approaching them, you haven't tripped over any useful content that they've put out in terms of what to do if you've got problems with building safety, or just trying to understand whether they were prominent to you?
Not initially, no.
Okay. It's useful to know. I mean, they get millions of pounds worth of government funding every year to help leaseholders, and it's always good to test whether that funding is actually making it to the front line, if you see what I mean. And you have a view on that, but it's always good to ask as to whether that's meeting the objective. But I think that's probably answered that question from you in terms of its usefulness. So we will see. And then, so going forward, what are your thoughts in terms of resolutions to the problem? Do you see that there's any sort of light on the horizon, or is it still pretty dark, or what are your thoughts in terms of where you are right now?
For me personally, in my own building, quite dark, because as I mentioned earlier, I still don't know the full budget or remediation costs that are coming my way. And similar story for the fire alarm installation. That's still going out for tender. We have no idea how much that will cost. And then in terms of timescale as well, nothing has started. So it's a case of, okay, is it going to be a few months or is it going to be years?